part of the courtroom, and I was sitting on this chair. Okay. The rest of the group were examining the windows and the drafts around the windows, and I suddenly felt very, very cold, very cold. And I said to the person in the group who had this thermometer, "I'm really, really cold. What's the temperature in here, Wendy?" And Wendy looked at the temperature and she said, "Oh, it's 19.5 degrees. Okay, fair enough. For some reason I felt cold. About 10 to 15 minutes later, I was warming up slightly, but the vigil came to an end. And Wendy gave me the thermometer, and I put it on the chair that I had been sitting on, and it went down to 14.6. Okay. Now I'd started to warm up by that point, so if I'd got the thermometer off her at the time at which I thought, "Blimey, I'm cold," then it might have been lower, but I don't know. So anyway, I then started to examine. And above the chair, under the chair, to the side of the chair, it was all 19.5 degrees, but on the chair, it was 14.6. And now I'm not sure if these pictures are in the right order, but I then left the thing on the chair, and it slowly, over the period of the next half hour, warmed up. These aren't quite in the right order, but it slowly warmed up over the next half an hour. It didn't quite get back to being 19.5 before we had to go off to the next place. But yeah, that is photographic evidence that something has happened. But what it was, we don't know.
What's this? What's that called? Is it just a thermometer? Or is it special?
Yeah, a thermometer, a digital temperature probe. It's this end of it that measures the temperature.
I've heard before that decrease in temperature could mean that there's some entity there. So is that?
That's the theory. Yeah, that is a theory that says it's coming from something that's trying to materialise. It could potentially, I suppose, have been a draft, but it took a long time to warm up. So that seems to be unlikely. Otherwise, yeah, I don't know what it would be. But it was, that's, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, that's the best bit that I've got.
Is that, while you were waiting for the temperature to increase, how long was that over?
That was over half an hour that it slowly went up. And it was about 5 to 10 minutes before I got the temperature probe that I first noticed it becoming very, very cold.
Joined here with Mark, and we've just been to a meeting with the BSPRI, and I was just wondering what it is that motivates you to keep this group going, and what is it that made you start in the first place?
Yeah, okay. I'm a little bit sad in that it started with me. Well, it actually started when I was young. There was a couple of things that happened to me that I couldn't really explain. But now when I look back on what happened to me, one thing that I heard was a man's voice calling my name. It was in the middle of the night. I was scared. You know, it's that typical walking through the churchyard sort of feeling. And I couldn't really explain it at that time. I was brought up to believe in the afterlife and, you know, God and all that. I've since changed my views a little bit. So I've always been intrigued in trying to explain the unknown. That voice calling me now was probably in my head. You know, it was probably just, you know, psychological. I remember seeing also when I was very young like a fireball in the sky. And I was in a park with some of my mates. I must have been about 11 or 12, and I said, "Did you see that?" And nobody else saw it, so I thought I was the only person that saw it. Of course, now when you know more about things like, you know, meteorites and things falling from the sky, even in daylight, you can see something, and I might have just been in the right place at the right time to see that. So I am a little bit sad when I'm interested in that sort of thing, because I used to watch the X-Files, and that's what got me into it back in the 1990s, because that's how old I am. And it got me interested in, you know, all those things that people can't explain, like you know, are UFOs, do they exist? And haunting phenomena was probably the most intriguing, because not that I'd experienced anything from a haunting perspective, but it always intrigued me, you know, is there life after death? It's a big question, isn't it, that everybody wants answered. So if we can show the existence of ghosts, then we might be able to show that there is life after death, and that's a massive question for us as human beings, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when I first got into it, when I actually sort of picked it up seriously, was around about sort of 2010, and I joined this team. And it's the first team that I joined. I always had this interest in looking at the history of places and whether they're haunted, and I used to read a lot. But when I first joined this team, I probably was a little bit on the fence as to whether I believed in the paranormal or not. The more you do this type of stuff, and I wanted to join a scientific-based group, because I'm not interested in doing any of the spiritualist stuff. The more I got into it, the actual more of a bug it got for me. You know, it actually hooked me, because I could see there were some methods to some of the investigations that took place, and within a short time of joining BSPRI, I became a member of ASAP, which is the national body of looking at these types of things on a scientific basis. So what we do is and what really intrigues me most is getting a referral from perhaps a member of the public, interviewing them, finding out as much as we can about their personal experiences, and then investigating the phenomena that's been reported, and trying to replicate the conditions as much as possible. So we can try and establish as to whether that, you know, is it psychological, has it got a natural cause. We'll rule out everything that can be explained first, before we come to the conclusion that we can explain it. And that's when we will start to dig deeper, and we'll start to look at, you know, potentially, is this paranormal or not? Because a lot of what you see on the TV, and what you read in the magazines and the papers, people don't look beyond the initial experience. You've got to look beyond that. You've got to investigate it a lot further, and we tend to go that extra, you know, that extra stage, and that's why BSPRI is still around. It's been around since 2003. People come and go, but you know, there's a hard core of about 10 of us that continue to do it. We're all interested in it. We're all coming to it from different perspectives, and we're trying to find different answers. You know, the one key thing about our group is that we are what we call belief neutral. So it doesn't matter what belief you've got, whether you're a skeptic, whether you're a believer. We all investigate the same way. We all use scientific methodology. So we leave our belief at the door when we go into a property, and we'll investigate the facts.
So when you say sort of these scientific methodologies, like what type of equipment are you dealing with when you go to research?
So initially there won't be any equipment. We will sit down with a witness. We'll try and get as much information as we possibly can. We'll do what's known as an extraneous factors survey. So we'll look at a property, and we'll look at all those things from the makeup of the building, you know, the environment, what things we could expect based on our experience of what people report. So things like you know, creaky doors, drafts, you know, glass panes missing in an older property. All those things can build up that sort of atmosphere, and you know, people can misinterpret what's taking place. So we'll note down all the extraneous factors before we do that. So we know potentially what some of those understandable factors are before we even go into a property. The trouble is, it's very difficult to isolate the human mind from the actual circumstances. Whenever we go into a property, that always in the back of your mind is that feeling of suggestion, is this place haunted? So that can play tricks on your own perception, and it can play tricks on how you interpret things as well. So what I think what this group tends to do, and we do really well because we trust each other, is we ask lots of questions. So if somebody experiences something, then we will try and work out exactly what's taking place at that particular time. The other thing that we tend to do when we go into a property is we won't go in necessarily with equipment on the first occasion. We're just going to get a feel for the place and work out what happens naturally. It's very difficult to control locations because, as you can see, all around us here, if you're in a busy city environment, there are lots of sounds, there are lots of noises. So you have to take that into account as well. You can't do something in a controlled environment when you're doing this type of investigation. It's just the nature of it. You can't really control it. So what you need to do is you need to control as much as you possibly can, and then put things in place to explain other things that are happening. So, for example, you might want to put CCTV into corridors and areas where people might be moving, so that when you do hear footsteps, you can say, well, actually, nobody's been through that location. Yeah. So that's what we tend to do.
I've been involved in the paranormal side of things for about 10 years, and I started off going off on commercial ghost hunts, seeing what it was all about. First place I ever went to was Woodchester Mansion. Commercial ghost hunts, I don't know if you've been on one yourself, it's all very much an event. So there's nothing scientific, there's no evidence led, it's an event basically. So they involve you in things like Ouija board, table tipping, dowsing rods. Now, it's not to say, I mean, a lot of those methods were used many, many years ago from Victorian seances, but I've probably been on about over 100 ghost hunts over the years. And as fun as they are, you're with public that you don't know from Adam or Eve, and it's all about trust. When you're doing them, there's nothing scientific about Ouija boards and things like that, and often you'll find people are just pushing the planchette around anyway. So you get bored of that, and then I started looking at the scientific side of things and evidence-led, and then that's when I went to do training, did the training courses with ASAP, and then asked around for scientific evidence-led base groups. For where I live, there was one in Wales, or there was the Bristol team, BSPRI, and that's when I got introduced to Mark and come down and joined BSPRI. So even though, as much as I've had paranormal experiences, it's no more than having a dream and you saying you've had a dream about this. That was your experience and you can't prove it. So as much as I do believe there is paranormal, it's all about proving it, scientifically.
So would you say there was a particular experience that you had in the past that made you really...
My granddad died, and he was on my dad's side of the family, and you know what families are like, they all fall out, so I never really knew granddad that much, and unfortunately when he died, I didn't see him for probably years before he died, and I went to bed one night, I was still wide awake, the lights were on in my bedroom, and I was sat in bed, you reminisce, and I was thinking about granddad, and I could physically feel and see someone sit down on the end of my bed, and you could see the imprint of someone sitting there. Now, I hadn't been asleep, so there was no sleep paralysis or anything like that. As I said, lights were on, you could see the physical indent of someone sitting on the bed. As you do, you scream because you don't know what's going on. And then I was talking to different people, and they said, perhaps it was granddad and so on and so forth. Got no evidence, and I know that was the only proof that I had. And I've had other different issues and events occur. Years ago, I went down the spiritual side of the route and sat in development circle, looked at mediumship and clairvoyance and so on and so forth, because you're always looking for answers. So as much as I believe in it, I've looked at the spiritual side, but there's no evidence or no proof in that. Again, it's all what's contained in your own mind and your own personal experiences, your own personal beliefs. I need to prove it scientifically and through evidence-led.